Nobody noticed the kid in section 212 that night. Nobody except Bob Dylan. And in exactly 90 seconds, one impossible decision would turn a forgettable concert ticket into the first chapter of a story the music world would argue about for decades. But before that moment, before the lights shifted and history bent, July 1988 at Madison Square Garden felt like any other sold-out Dylan show. Loud, restless, half the crowd pretending they understood the rearranged songs while the other half waited for something recognizable. Up in the upper bowl, where the air felt thinner and the sound arrived a split second late, 16-year-old Evan Miller sat with his hands folded tightly in his lap, afraid that if he clapped too hard he'd expose how badly he wanted to belong to the world happening on stage. Evan wasn't supposed to be here for destiny or discovery or miracles. He was here because his uncle had an extra ticket and because it was easier than saying no. He wore a faded blue jacket that still smelled faintly of his bedroom, a jacket he'd thrown on without thinking, the same one he wore every night while sitting on the edge of his bed playing a cheap electric guitar with a volume knob that crackled whenever he touched it. Evan didn't tell people he played guitar. That felt like lying. He told them he messed around, which was safer, smaller, easier to dismiss. His father had left the previous winter with a suitcase and a sentence that never quite landed. I just need some time. And Evan had learned quickly that time didn't always come back. Music became the place where he put things he couldn't say out loud, half-finished songs he never played for anyone, melodies that stopped just before they became embarrassing. He'd never been to Madison Square Garden before, never been in a room that big, and from where he sat Bob Dylan looked less like a person and more like a moving shadow wrapped in sound. Dylan didn't talk much that night. He rarely did. He let songs drift apart and reassemble themselves in ways that made casual fans uneasy, and Evan watched not the crowd or the lights, but Dylan's hands. The way they hesitated before a chord change, the way mistakes weren't corrected but absorbed, turned into something else. Evan leaned forward without realizing it, elbows on knees, eyes locked, studying every movement the way some kids studied textbooks they hoped would lead them out of town someday. Around him, people shouted requests, complained about tempos, left for beer. Evan stayed still. He wasn't waiting for a hit song. He was waiting for understanding. During Tangled Up in Blue, something strange happened. Evan felt it before he understood it. Dylan looked up, not randomly, not scanning, but with purpose, his gaze drifting higher than usual, lingering on the upper sections longer than a performer normally would. Evan felt a flicker of self-consciousness and immediately dismissed it. That kind of thing didn't happen. Famous people didn't see kids like him. Famous people saw crowds, numbers, noise. Evan dropped his eyes, embarrassed by the thought, and focused harder on the music, silently mapping the chord shapes in his head, fingers twitching against his thighs like they wanted to move. The song ended. Applause rolled through the building like weather. Dylan stepped back, conferred with the band, and launched into another rearranged version of an older song, one Evan knew well enough to feel when something was off. Dylan changed a line. Just one. Evan noticed. He always noticed. He wondered if anyone else did. He wondered if it mattered. The lights stayed pointed outward, the audience a dark mass, anonymous and safe, and Evan relaxed into that anonymity, grateful for it, unaware that it was already slipping away. He didn't know that Dylan had clocked him the way musicians sometimes clock each other, not with certainty, but with curiosity, sensing someone listening in the right way, the dangerous way, the way that asks questions instead of looking for answers. Evan didn't know that. Dylan had once sat in rooms like this as a nobody, watching hands, learning what couldn't be taught, feeling both invisible and exposed at the same time. He didn't know that something about a kid in a blue jacket not clapping, not shouting, just watching, had tugged on a thread Dylan hadn't planned on touching that night. Evan thought the concert would end like all concerts ended for people like him. Applause, lights up, a slow shuffle toward the exits, a story he'd tell maybe once or twice before it faded into memory. He thought he'd go home, sit on his bed, pick up his guitar, and try, again, to finish a song that always seemed to stop short of being brave. He thought he was safe in the stands, one face among thousands, unremarkable and unchosen. He didn't know that in the space of one more song, that safety would disappear, that the distance between stage and seat would collapse, and that the reason Bob Dylan had been looking up into the darkness wasn't accident or boredom or habit. It was recognition. Bob Dylan stopped the song in the middle of a verse, and Madison Square Garden didn't understand what that meant yet, only that something had gone wrong or something had gone different, which was always harder to read with Dylan. The band stalled instinctively, the drummer lifting his sticks and holding them there, cymbals humming like they were waiting for permission. The crowd reacted in fragments, confused applause, scattered whistles, the uneasy laugh that happens when people sense they're on the edge of a moment they didn't pay for. Dylan stepped forward, squinting into the dark upper sections as if the answer to a question only he had asked was hiding somewhere above the lights. "There's a kid up there," he said into the microphone, not loud, not dramatic, just certain, and the room leaned in without realizing it. He raised his hand and pointed, slow and deliberate, the way you point when you don't want to miss. "Blue jacket. Section 212. You've been watching my hands all night." For a split second nothing happened. Then the spotlight operator panicked, the beam jerking across the stands like a searchlight before landing. Wrong, then right, on Evan Miller, who felt his chest drop as 40,000 people suddenly learned he existed. He froze, face hot, eyes stinging, every instinct screaming that this was a mistake that would correct itself if he stayed still. But Dylan didn't look away. "You play guitar?" Dylan asked. Evan didn't trust his voice. He nodded, small, barely visible. Dylan smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly or cruel, just knowing. "Yeah," he said. "I thought so." Security was already moving, murmurs crackling through headsets, and someone near the stage tried to wave it off, but Dylan lifted a hand without turning. "Let him come down," he said. No explanation, no discussion. The rulebook folded in on itself. Evan was guided out of his row on shaking legs, past strangers who suddenly treated him like he mattered, down stairwells he'd only seen in movies, the sound of the crowd following him like pressure. He kept waiting for someone to stop him, to apologize, to say there'd been a misunderstanding, but no one did. When he stepped onto the stage, the lights hit him full force and erased the room beyond them, and for a moment it felt like the safest place he'd ever been because he couldn't see anyone judging him. Dylan handed him a guitar without ceremony, the strap warm, the weight unfamiliar and heavy. "Play something," Dylan said. "Not something good. Something true." Evan's fingers shook as he found the fretboard. He didn't think. Thinking would have ruined it. He played the song he always played when he couldn't sleep, the one about doors closing quietly and people leaving before you were ready, the one he never finished because the ending scared him. His voice cracked on the second line. He missed a change. The band waited, watching him like he was the only clock that mattered. When he finished, the silence felt physical, like the room had inhaled and forgotten how to let it go. Dylan nodded once. "That's a real song," he said. Then he did the unthinkable. He stepped back from the mic. "Take us out," Dylan said, glancing at the band. "Follow him." For the rest of the set, Bob Dylan stood just off to the side while a kid from the upper bowl led his band through a song the world had never heard and wasn't supposed to hear yet. And somewhere between the last chord and the roar that followed, Evan Miller stopped being invisible. By the time Evan Miller woke up the next morning, the story had already outrun him, sprinting ahead through radio stations, morning shows, and phone calls he didn't know how to answer yet. His uncle was standing in the kitchen holding the newspaper like it might bite him, pointing at a grainy photo that barely looked real. Evan on stage at Madison Square Garden, midstrum, Bob Dylan just behind him, half in shadow, as if daring anyone to explain what they'd witnessed. Evan felt disconnected from it, like the image belonged to someone else, some braver version of himself who hadn't almost dropped the guitar when Dylan handed it to him. By noon, the house phone wouldn't stop ringing. Managers, producers, labels, people who spoke quickly and confidently, who told him how rare moments like that were and how important it was not to waste them. Evan listened politely, wrote nothing down, and felt the same knot in his stomach he'd felt on stage. Only now there was no music to hide behind. Bob Dylan, meanwhile, said nothing. He didn't mention Evan at the next show or the one after that. When a reporter finally asked him why he'd stopped the concert, Dylan shrugged. "Kid was listening," he said. "That's rarer than people think." The clip ran everywhere. Bootleg VHS recordings, late-night talk show replays, endlessly dissected by people who argued whether it was planned or reckless or genius. Some called it exploitation. Some called it prophecy. Evan went back to school the following Monday and discovered fame didn't arrive all at once. It leaked in. Whispers in hallways. Teachers lingering too long after class. Friends who hadn't noticed his guitar before suddenly asking what chords he used. Within weeks, he was playing small clugs, then slightly bigger ones. Always introduced as that kid Dylan pulled on stage, a phrase that both opened doors and trapped him inside them. The pressure came fast. Write something worthy. Don't sound too polished. Don't lose the rawness. Don't become a gimmick. Evan almost quit twice. What saved him wasn't advice or contracts or even success. It was the memory of Dylan stepping aside, of being trusted with silence instead of applause. For years later, Evan released his first album. It didn't chase radio. It didn't explain the story. It just sounded honest. Critics tried to name him, compare him, place him in a lineage. Evan ignored most of it. In the liner notes, he wrote a single sentence: "For the man who stopped the show instead of a song." Dylan never responded publicly. But years later, backstage at a festival in California, he passed Evan in a hallway, nodded once, and said, "Still listening?" Evan smiled. Every night, Dylan kept walking. Fame followed Evan after that. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily, the way real things tend to. And if you asked him where it started, he wouldn't say Madison Square Garden. He'd say it started long before that, in a bedroom with a broken guitar and unfinished songs, when he learned how to listen. The rest, the spotlight, the stage, the moment, only worked because Bob Dylan saw a kid doing the one thing that couldn't be fate.